When Young Sheldon started leaning heavier into drama in its later seasons, there was a noticeable tonal shift. The show matured, which wasn't a bad thing. George Sr.'s decline, mounting family tension, and the looming shadow of events we already knew from The Big Bang Theory gave the series emotional weight. But with that weight came a risk. The comedy that once defined the show began to feel quieter, sometimes even secondary. That's where Georgie and Mandy's first marriage, and more specifically, Georgie and Mandy's marriage, quietly stepped in and restored balance. At its core, Young Sheldon worked because of contrast. Sheldon's rigid logic against East Texas culture. His intellectual superiority against everyday common sense. But as Sheldon grew more confident and more isolated in his brilliance, that contrast began to narrow. The joke wasn't evolving, it was repeating. Georgie and Mandy's storyline injected a completely different comedic engine into the series, adult responsibility colliding with youthful immaturity. Georgie's transition from hustling teenager to husband and father didn't just expand his character, it revitalized the show's humor. Suddenly, the comedy wasn't about a genius misunderstanding sarcasm. It was about a young man trying to be taken seriously while still figuring himself out. There's something inherently funny about someone who thinks they've mastered adulthood only to be humbled by bills, parenting, and marriage. Mandy's presence sharpened that humor. She isn't a caricature or a punchline delivery system. She's emotionally direct, grounded, and unafraid to challenge Georgie. Their banter doesn't rely on absurd misunderstandings. It thrives on realistic friction. When they argue, it's not slapstick chaos. It's the kind of disagreement that feels uncomfortably familiar. And that familiarity makes it funnier. The genius of their marriage arc is that it reframed comedy through stakes. Sheldon's conflicts were often intellectual. Georgie and Mandy's conflicts are practical and emotional. Money matters. Living arrangements matter. Pride matters. Those pressures create comedy that feels organic instead of constructed. Another reason their marriage saved the comedic tone is that it restored unpredictability. By the later seasons of Young Sheldon, we understood Sheldon's rhythms. We knew how he would react in most scenarios. But Georgie and Mandy brought volatility. Georgie's impulsiveness paired with Mandy's clarity meant their scenes could go anywhere. A heartfelt moment could pivot into an argument. A disagreement could unexpectedly turn into tenderness. And then there's the larger franchise context. In The Big Bang Theory, adult Georgie was often described through Sheldon's biased memories, less academic, more reactive, emotionally loud. Watching his younger self build a marriage humanized him in ways the original series never had time to explore. The comedy surrounding him stopped being about comparison and started being about capability. He's not Sheldon. He doesn't need to be. And that shift removed the hierarchy that once defined their dynamic. What also makes their marriage so crucial is tonal balance. As Young Sheldon edged closer to the tragic elements of the Cooper family's future, the risk of tonal heaviness grew. Georgie and Mandy's storyline provided warmth without denying reality. Yes, their marriage faces strain. Yes, we know from canon it won't last. But the show doesn't rush toward collapse. It finds humor in the effort, the daily attempt to make something work. Their dynamic also allowed supporting characters to interact in fresher ways. Mary's protective instincts play differently around Mandy than they did around Sheldon. George Sr.'s advice feels more vulnerable when directed at his son's marriage instead of teenage rebellion. The family ensemble regained a sense of communal chaos that felt lighter, even when circumstances weren't. Perhaps most importantly, Georgie and Mandy's marriage grounded the franchise's humor in adulthood rather than adolescence. Young Sheldon began as a story about childhood genius navigating a world that didn't understand him. But Georgie and Mandy shifted that focus toward two young adults navigating a world that doesn't pause for their growth. That evolution made the comedy more layered. It wasn't just about eccentricity anymore. It was about survival, pride, and compromise. And in many ways, that's more sustainable. A joke built on Sheldon misunderstanding social cues can only stretch so far. A joke built on two people trying to balance love and responsibility has infinite variations because it mirrors real life. It feels lived in. Their marriage didn't replace Sheldon as the emotional anchor. It complemented him. It widened the show's lens. Instead of orbiting one mind, the comedy expanded to include two imperfect adults learning in real time. That expansion gave the series renewed energy at a moment when it could have easily grown stale. So, when people say Georgie and Mandy's marriage saved Young Sheldon's comedy, it's not exaggeration. It's recognition of a tonal rescue. They reintroduced unpredictability. They deepened the humor with real stakes. And they proved that sometimes the funniest stories aren't about genius. They're about growing up faster than you expected and trying not to fall apart in the process. In doing so, they didn't just preserve the show's humor. They evolved it.